Wayne, waar is Wayne? Ja, daar is Wayne en u gaat hem van harte verwelkomen. Wayne Roberts is onze volgende spreker.
Today, creating tomorrow. A better tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I very much appreciate your bilingualism and ability to work in English, and I apologize for my lack of bilingualism and inability to work in Dutch. I'd like to share with you today some of the things that we have learned in Toronto about using food and using urban agriculture to build a better city structures, and better city buildings. So that's an unusual combination, I think, but I think it's one of the future trends that is worth watching. This is my cat, and she is learning the first lesson of dealing with both food and deltas, which is you can't solve the problem by only looking at one side. You've got to look at all 6 sides of the cube. And I believe that that is the problem that we have, especially in dealing with food, and I imagine it is a problem you would have dealing with deltas. In my opinion, there is, in a sense, no significant food problem in the world. We produce enough food to feed 7 billion Olympic athletes. So the fact that we have hunger or the fact that we have obesity is not a problem of food. It's our problem of our inability to deal with 6 sides at a time, or perhaps, if your cat knows how to play Sudoku, to deal with 9 wide and 9 deep. And so I believe the fundamental problem that we have with food, and perhaps one you'll have with deltas, is that if you have government departments that are focused on one item, whether it's agriculture that's in charge of food or health that's in charge of food, you will not have an ability to see all 6 sides at once. And that is what lies behind the need for us to develop new structures for decision-making and governance. And I believe that we've come across one of them in Toronto, which is a Food Policy Council. And that's the group I managed. And some people refer to it as a think tank, but I prefer to be a bit more humble about it, because in some ways it's not so much about new and brilliant ideas as it is a link tank to bring all the different elements together, who together can produce a solution. And that's really what a Food Policy Council is. It's fundamentally a group of people who are live with a problem but are solutions oriented, and when we get all together we can work out some creative ideas. And in engineering, I believe the term that developed after World War II is called skunk works, which was a firm was given a challenge of building an airplane that would go faster than any plane had ever gone before, but with lighter materials. So how do you put those 2 contradictory features together? And they developed a department that was given a lot of freedom called the Skunk Works Department. And in a sense, that's what we have. We believe in a dense city that's crowded so that you can have lots of urban functions, and we want to have room to grow food. Not so much because people need it to eat as because production of food is a social activity and an educational activity. So how do you put those 2 together? And we came up with the idea at this food summit, which we held last year, that urban agriculture should be part of urban infrastructure, part of social infrastructure, part of green infrastructure. Let's just take a simple example. Here's a community garden, and I happened to go on a trip of community gardens in low-income areas in Toronto with a woman who was in charge of keeping Toronto, as the slogan is, clean and green. You may have heard that Toronto is sometimes referred to as New York run by the Dutch. And so it's very cleanliness oriented. And what she understood in the course of going through a day's tour of community farmers markets and community gardens was, if people felt that they owned the land, they kept it beautiful and clean. And if they felt they did not own it, it was not theirs, they let it become ugly. And so as a result of that, when she returned, she changed the department name to the Department of the Public Realm instead of Clean and Green, and funded our program to promote community gardens and community farmers markets. So that's an example of a connection, and I believe that technology is very simple, which is either farmers markets with stands or community gardens, but it eliminates the need to have all sorts of complicated machinery to pick up litter and to haul it out of the city. One of the places we started with was a charter, and I know you're familiar with the fact that many aspects of food are very controversial. Should you be organic? Should you be vegetarian? Should you buy local? There's all sorts of issues to have a division of opinion on, but the amazing thing is if you ask people, where would you like this city to be in 20 years in terms of food? There is enormous unanimity. There's no one thinks children should go to school hungry. There's no one who thinks the world should be more polluted to produce food. We couldn't have food without Dutch people in Canada. This is Albert van Donkersgoed, who's a leading farm critic in Ontario, and Jason Verkijk, who has just decided that the color of carrots does not have to be orange, as the Prince of Orange once dictated, but that they should be red, as many of the people who live in Toronto who come from Pakistan and Southern Asia, and he developed the red carrot, and we gave him the Local Food Hero Award for producing it. Again, a fairly simple technology, a change of seeds, but it eliminates the need for all sorts of transportation technology. Excuse me, these are both pictures of how you could call food or urban agriculture a social technology. And in this case, you know, in most cases of immigration, it is the husband who wants to move, the wife is a bit reluctant, and the child is totally reluctant because they have to give up their whole world. And this little community garden was the place where this young child was transplanted over the course of a summer. And so, again, you see a valuable social function, and in a sense, the need to define this as infrastructure. Many people say that the food movement, especially in North America, is made up of elitists and yuppies, and these are the yuppies who invented community gardening in Toronto. And the first one in the early 1980s, mainly by Chinese seniors in a low-income housing project. And the term that we've developed to describe this is that it creates social capital. It's not so much the food, although the food is not insignificant. It's the social capital, and it can be one of two types. One that you would be most familiar with in the family meal is bonding. That is, it brings people together. As in banquets when you get married, it brings all your friends and kin together. And the other is called bridging capital, where it allows you to meet someone you would normally not meet. One of the ways we use this in Toronto is, and I believe you do as well in the Netherlands, is generation gardens. For seniors like this who may not be literate, certainly would not be computer literate, their grandchildren can't really appreciate what they're bringing in terms of skills, and when they are in the garden, they get a chance to relate and get some real quality time. So again, another form of what you could call social technology that builds social capital. And the same is true in schools. You could, in a sense, we're trying to call these outdoor classrooms, where our campaign is to have every school will have a garden for the students to learn from, and it will be regarded not as a recreational time, but as an outdoor classroom. Again, part of the technology. Now, here is a fairly typical thing that you would see in most North American cities. About half of Chicago, Buffalo, and Detroit are in this state, fairly small portions of Toronto and perhaps small portions of your area. It's what's called vacant space. So one of our members worked with, so here's wasted space, worked with 16 to 18-year-olds who were on the edge of being sent to a juvenile detention center. And this is what they did with that vacant space in a very short period of time, in the course of one season. And as you know, when you're working with people at risk populations, the last stage is that they have to learn to give back to society, which is a great boost to their ego and a great step forward. And that's the last step. So again, being able to turn a useless amount of space, people who are heading towards danger, into a real positive for the whole community. Food Policy Council started in North America before Europe, I believe, because in the 1980s, for the first time, regular families faced hunger, and about 10% of the population of North America can't make it through to the end of the month without having to go to a food bank, which I believe is not yet a reality in most of Europe. And so the city set up as a partner organization to the Food Policy Council an NGO called Food Share, and they squatted on this building in an abandoned industrial area and asked this question: we don't have room to grow food in Toronto, but 1/6 of Toronto and 1/6 of almost every city in the world is flat roofs. And so they built the first rooftop certified organic farm in Canada here, and that's Toronto's famous CN Tower in the back. And from that time on, the Food Policy Council became the champion in Toronto of green roofs. And I must say that when we first started off advocating green roofs, people thought I was insane. And by 2 years ago, the city had made it compulsory for every building over a certain size that it had to have a green roof. So you could say I went from me being insane to the whole city being insane, or that the job of a Food Policy Council, I call it in bureaucraties, is issue management. We take an idea from when it is a bit crazy and put it through its steps scientifically. We got engineers on side, we got architects on side, and the reason why the city does this is because it keeps water in the roof instead of into the sewage system. And the food that is grown is icing on the cake. It's a free thing on top of it. So that, in my opinion, is the example of how we can start to work together with people who do basic physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and food infrastructure as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wayne. We all face dilemmas in our personal and professional lives. What was a real dilemma in creating this?
I think the challenge that we had is that when you introduce food, it challenges all the old definitions of left and right.
Mm-hmm.
So the left would traditionally say that it's the government's responsibility, and the right would say it's the individual's responsibility. And when you deal with food, you have to deal with both. Mm-hmm. So that's one level that's an emotional problem, is that it challenges everyone to rethink the way they think about
And how
politics.
did you solve that then in practice?
I would say it's a work in progress. But the interesting thing is that actually when you come down to it, most people are in the middle, and that's a big ground for us to work from.
So in Canada, everybody is CDA.
I wouldn't say
Christian Democrat.
I think people in Canada sort of lean to the left in terms of government response. I'd say we're approximately like the Dutch.
Yeah, well, CDA is our Christian Democratic Party, and its party color is green, by the way.
There you go.
Yeah. And what was really difficult? What was maybe even a setback?
Well, the problem is that I think, and this may be a problem that you would have with a Delta as well, is that I worked in the public health department, and if there was ever a crisis, then anything I was working on became almost irrelevant. It certainly couldn't get any attention for it. So when you're working on systemic issues, it's very hard to get the attention of people higher up. And so I believe that's the organizational issue we need to deal with something that's not urgent today, but will be urgent if we don't deal with it.
I'll tell you a little secret. Maybe it's even a secret for quite some people here. In 1966, we had a sort of social revolution in Holland. And it was led by a guy called Roel van Duin. And Roel van Duin had the idea of creating gardens and stuff like you have developed on the rooftops of houses in Amsterdam. And everybody said he was completely crazy. And that was 35 plus 13, that was 48 years ago. And we had to wait from something from Canada before his dream came true. Thank you very much.
Thank you.